I arrived at the departmental store at 10 p.m. for my first night shift. As a security guard, I had worked in many places before, but this was my first time at this particular location. The store was enormous, with several floors filled with all kinds of merchandise. I felt a sense of unease as I walked through the store, knowing that I would be alone for the entire night. As soon as midnight struck, I heard a strange noise. It was a low rumbling sound that seemed to be coming from the floor beneath me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that it was probably just the building settling. However, as I continued my rounds, I noticed that the lights were flickering. It was as if someone was playing with the light switch, turning the lights on and off at random intervals. I had a thought that maybe some social media influences had snuck into the store to try and stay overnight without being caught. It wouldn't be the first time, and it was starting to become a bit of a trend. So, I made my way towards the flickering light to check it out, ready to catch them in the act. But to my surprise, no one was there. They must have gotten away before I arrived. I gritted my teeth in frustration. These pranks were no laughing matter, and if I ever caught them, I would not hesitate to call the police on them. I continued my rounds, checking each floor of the store to make sure that everything was in order. As I was walking through the clothing section, I noticed that one of the mannequins had moved. It was in a different position than when I had passed it earlier. A chill ran down my spine. I had heard stories about haunted departmental stores before, but I never believed them until now. I shook off the eerie feeling by reassuring myself that it was probably just those social media influences again. I couldn't wait to catch them in the act and teach them a lesson they wouldn't forget. My unease only increased as I continued my rounds. There really isn't anyone around. The noises became louder and more frequent, and the lights continued to flicker. I could feel something watching me from the shadows, and I started to feel like I was being followed. Finally, at the end of my shift, I made my way to the security office, feeling relieved that I would be able to leave the store soon. As I settled into the security office, I realized that the events of the night had left me shaken. I knew that I had a long way to go before I would be able to feel comfortable working the night shift at the departmental store. The second night of my shift started off with a sense of dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was going to happen. As midnight approached, the atmosphere in the departmental store changed. The lights flickered more frequently, and the strange noises grew louder. I tried to focus on my work, but my anxiety made it impossible to concentrate. Despite the fear and anxiety that were gripping me, I knew that I had a job to do. So, I took a deep breath, mustered my courage, picked up my trusty torch, and began my rounds. As I walked through the store, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every time I turned around, I expected to see something lurking in the shadows. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination, but I knew that something was wrong. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my way past the electronics section. Suddenly, one of the televisions flickered to life, illuminating the darkness with an eerie glow. The static on the screen seemed to taunt me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Just as suddenly as it had turned on, the television switched off, plunging the room back into darkness. That's when I heard a low, guttural growl coming from behind me. I spun around, shining my torch in every direction, but there was nothing there. The fear and anxiety that had been building inside me came to a head, and I struggled to keep myself from running away in terror. The rest of the night was a blur of fear and anxiety. The noises grew louder and more frequent, and I felt like I was being watched from every direction. I couldn't focus on anything except the sense of dread that hung over me. Finally, the sun began to rise, and my shift was over. I stumbled out of the departmental store, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt like I had narrowly escaped something terrible, but I didn't know what it was. As I made my way home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me. Every sound made me jump, and I felt like I was being watched from every direction. When I finally got home, I collapsed onto my bed, exhausted and terrified. The second night of my shift had been a nightmare, and I knew that things were only going to get worse. The third night of my shift was the worst by far. As soon as I stepped into the departmental store, I could sense that something was different. The atmosphere was even more eerie than before, and the feeling of dread that had been following me for the past 2 nights was now a constant presence. As I made my rounds through the store, passing the furniture section, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. There was something there, but I couldn't tell what it was. The feeling was too strong. Suddenly, I heard a hiss from behind my ear. I spun around, but there was no one there. When I turned back again, I was shocked to see that all the chairs on display had been stacked into a pile 2 times higher than me. I stumbled backwards and fell to the ground, dropping my torch in the process. As I picked myself up, I heard a loud impact noise coming from the clothing section. Nothing made sense at this moment, but I knew I had to get to the security office. On my way there, I saw a mannequin lying in a large pile of toppled clothes. It must have been thrown there by an invisible force. A wave of terror washed over me as I realized that the poltergeist had grown even stronger. It was no longer content with just moving objects around. It was now actively trying to harm me. The lights flickered on and off, casting the entire store into an eerie half-light. Every time I turned a corner, I expected to come face to face with the poltergeist. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see anything. I had to run past the electronics section to reach the security office. This time, not just one TV, but almost all of them turned on by themselves. The static sound and the glow from the TVs filled the entire department. My heart pounded like crazy, and fear and adrenaline drove me to new heights. And then, all of the TVs switched off by themselves, leaving me in a silent and pitch-black darkness that hit me harder with fear. As I made my way through the store, I heard a faint whispering sound. It was like 1,000 voices all speaking at once, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. The sound grew louder and more frantic, and I thought I was going crazy. I tried to ignore the voices, but they continued to grow louder and more insistent. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the store, knocking over several displays and sending papers flying everywhere. The voices grew even louder, and I felt like I was going to be swallowed up by the chaos. As I finally reached the security office, I collapsed into the chair, trembling and gasping for breath. I could hear the voices whispering in the darkness outside, and I knew that I had to get out of there as soon as possible. As I reached for the door to leave, I felt a sudden force slam it shut, preventing me from opening it. I frantically turned to look at the security footage, but there was no one outside the door. As I watched, all of the cameras started to fizzle with static waves. Suddenly, a voice began to whisper around me, and the security office lights started flickering on and off. I felt completely helpless and scared, so I curled myself up in a corner and covered my ears, hoping that it would all go away. I had lost track of time, but then I heard the doorknob turn and the door slowly swung open. It was the morning shift security guard. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The sun had risen, and my shift was finally over. I couldn't take it anymore. The poltergeist was too strong, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to survive another night alone in the departmental store. I resigned from my job, feeling relieved that I didn't have to face the horrors of the store anymore. But even after quitting, I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Every night, I felt like someone was watching me from the shadows. I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't focus on anything else. I knew that I had to find out what was going on. One day, I decided to visit the departmental store again, but this time during the day. I wanted to ask the morning shift security guard some questions about what had been happening on the night shift. As I approached the store, I saw that there was a new security guard on duty. He looked like he was in his mid-20s, and he seemed nervous as he watched me approach. "Excuse me," I said. "I used to work here on the night shift, and I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions." The guard looked at me warily, but eventually nodded. I asked him if he had experienced anything strange on his shift, and he hesitated before answering. "Well," he said slowly, "I've only been working here for a few days, But I've already heard a lot of stories about the night shift. Apparently, almost everyone quits on the third day. I felt a chill run down my spine as I listened to him. It seemed like I wasn't the only one who had been affected by the poltergeist. "Have you heard any rumors about why that might be?" I asked. The guard looked around nervously before leaning in closer to me. "I heard that this store was built on top of a grave," he whispered, "and that there is a mass of unclaimed bodies buried underneath it." My heart skipped a beat as I realized the implications of what he was saying. It was no wonder that the poltergeist was so strong. It was being fueled by the restless spirits of the dead. As I left the departmental store, I knew that I would never be able to forget the horrors that I had experienced. Even now, years later, I still feel like someone is watching me in the dead of night, and I can't shake the feeling that the poltergeist is still out there, waiting for its next victim.